Okay. So hopefully it is recording. I'm just going to double check, and this has been a while since I've done this now. Is it recording? It is recording. Excellent. Okay. So anyways, okay, so welcome to Math 317 Operations Research. So I'm Professor Miller. I've been at Williams for on the order of 15 years. I was trained many years ago as a number theorist, but over the years I've started doing a lot of applied problems. A lot of this started when I was an undergraduate and I went to the used bookstore at Yale, and there was a really beautiful book on essentially the mathematics of linear programming applications to economics, and it was $3. And for a really good hardcover math book for $3, sure. As an interesting aside, the way they figured out I got to be careful because this is being recorded. The way my colleagues in the humanities who ran the used bookstore figured out how much you owed is they had a calculator and they added up the cost of your books. And then what they did is they wrote that number down on a piece of paper. Then they multiplied by 0.06 for the sales tax, and then they added back the original number. So this is a class about inefficiencies and what you can do. What's your first thought when you hear this?
Why not just multiply by 1.06?
Yeah, multiply by 1.06. So I told them that. And then, credit to them, they actually tested this with a few things. Wow, it seems to work. I told them, you can use this for just your 0.01% commission on every transaction, which sadly they were not willing to give me. But just one of the things I really want to hop on this year is there are so many inefficiencies around you. For some things, it doesn't matter. Computers are now so good. Computers are now so good that we are spoiled in terms of what they can do. Your cell phone has more power, I think, than is in the Voyager space probe, which is now past our solar system. And because of this, and thank you to all of you in CS and your predecessors, we can be a little bit careless on some things. But there are a lot of problems we'll see this semester where modern computers are still not strong enough to make even a dent in solving it, and we have to find better things. Part of it is a different philosophy from a lot of your previous math classes. We are not going to be trying to find the solution. We're going to be trying to find either a solution or an approximation to the solution. For a lot of problems in the real world, we don't even know all the values of the parameters you're trying to estimate or trying to put into your formula. My father was a double E in college, got an MBA, and while he was getting the MBA, he took a class with a very theoretical business professor who gave them an equation with 46 variables to tell you what your company should do in every configuration. And my father, I come from a long line of smartasses, he tried to control himself and with as level of voice as possible said, I don't even know the value of a lot of these variables for my own company, let alone for the opposition. And the professor just couldn't understand, isn't this a beautiful formula? And he just clenched his fist and says, yes, it's a beautiful formula. Completely useless to him in terms of what he's going to try to do. We can always develop beautiful advanced theories, but if we can't do anything with them in real time, the question is how useful is it? A lot of times it is very useful to know a solution exists. But in this class, we either want to be able to find the solution in a reasonable amount of time or find a close approximation to the solution. It's not good if we have to wait 50 years for something to come out. So a lot of this class is going to be trying to deal with inefficiency issues. I'm going to try to give lots of examples and lots of opportunities for you to work on this. And so, I mentioned the used book exchange where they were writing the numbers down and then adding. All you have to do is multiply by 1.06. There's lots of little things like this. I know we have a couple of first years here. A lot of my students are worried about trying to do things because they don't know too much yet. You don't have to be able to get to the best answer. You just have to do better than is being done. That is a very low bar. And so there's a lot of opportunities for tremendous improvement in the beginning if you just know a little bit. And so my goal in this course is to try to teach you the skills that you'll need to know. I used to tell my classes that if you knew probability, statistics, and programming, you would always have a job. I can't because someone sued her school when she didn't get a job after graduation. And so I have to be careful now. So you cannot sue me or Williams College. High school, go for it. Now, what's great is you can download her lawsuit where she misspells words like tuition. And she has discovered a new form of discrimination previously unknown, academic discrimination. She claimed her 2.6 was just as good as someone else's 3.6. and that the college wasn't doing as much for people with low GPAs. So, but while I can't guarantee that you will have a job, if you know a certain set of basic skills, it is extremely likely that you will have a job. We are going to have a board of trustees for this class, which will be composed of alums who are actually out there in the real world. And so they will be wonderful resources to talk to about classes like this. All right, so let me just talk a little bit about, the main topic is going to be linear programming. So you should have all had some experience with linear algebra. We're not going to be doing a tremendous amount with a lot of the different theorems in linear algebra, but we will be reviewing a lot of the key concepts and seeing how they're applied. And the goal is to apply them to some more interesting problems. So what's the biggest problem you solve in linear algebra? Biggest type of problem we solve in linear algebra. Finding eigenvalues, finding eigenvectors, findings, which is a great way to find, oftentimes, solutions to systems of equations. Normally, you have, a square matrix. You have as many variables as unknowns, and there should be a unique solution. If you have more variables than equations, what do you expect? Oops. So if you have more variables than equations, what do you expect typically will happen? Yes. Usually there'll be infinitely many solutions, unless I have things deliberately misaligned. I could have 2x plus 4y equals 8, 4x plus 8y equals 17,002. I can deliberately choose 2 parallel lines. Oh, sorry, I would have had to add more copies of, but I can deliberately arrange things in such a way that you're not going to get solutions by having something that's inconsistent. But as a general rule of thumb, you would expect to have multiple solutions. What linear programming does is it takes situations where you have more unknowns than equations frequently. So you expect to have multiple solutions. And the goal is I want to find a solution that has, in some sense, the best property. So I have to decide what I want to maximize or minimize. This is a huge, huge industry. And depending on what you value, you will have different choices for your function. So let's say you own American Airlines. What is your objective? And since you said your economics, I'm going to ask you. Your objective is to maximize profit, not revenue, profit. You want to make money. How do you make money? Cutting costs, increasing revenue. And maybe it's by flying people, but not necessarily, depending on what kind of subsidies you have. Then you have lots of constraints about how you can fly people. You can't have a plane being used to go from Los Angeles to New York at the same time as it's going from Sacramento to Phoenix. When you have pilots, they have to have a certain amount of downtime. And you have to decide, how do you want to run your network? Do you want to have planes in strategic reserve? Why might it be useful to have planes in strategic reserve?
So there's more resources available at any given time.
Okay, why is that good?
Because then you're more flexible.
So why? What could happen where I will need that? Be specific. Give me
like rushes when there's a lot of people willing to fly. I want to
That's unexpected. So that's the key word, unexpected. Maybe, for instance, there's been some mechanical problems. Maybe there's been a storm, and all of a sudden you have less available than you want, and then you move. What's the danger of having a large number of planes in strategic reserve? They're not in use. So you have the cost of maintaining them, and you have the fact that they're not flying. So you need to balance these things. A lot of it is then, how important is it if your certain flights don't happen? If there's a very famous person, for example, that could be very bad if they don't get on their flight. And so you have to decide how much of your resources do you want to put in your strategic reserves? Where do you put them? I was flying out of Albany recently, and it was so bad, I could just extrapolate and just see how bad of a flight it was going to be, where we're going to fly in the pot. Okay, so you're going to fly in the pot to Albany, then fix the plane. I just bought a ticket on another airline and just did not have enough time to risk waiting for all of this to happen. Albany is a small enough airport that they're not going to have a lot there in order to fix things. But the big hubs, and then you can ask, why do we have the hub system? Why do airlines fly like that? And you can talk all about these issues. So the question is, what do you want to maximize? So for a lot of industry questions, it's always going to be profit. Let's say you're trying to buy a house. What are you trying to maximize? Or what might you be trying to maximize?
Price per square foot.
Price per square foot. And so, or maybe maximize or minimize.
Minimize that.
So basically, you don't care what the house is as long as you get a good deal. There's a very nice movie, War of the Roses, where husband and wife are getting divorced and Danny DeVito is the lawyer. And the husband goes to Danny DeVito and says, we've decided how to split the house. This part I get, this part she gets. And the lawyer looks at him, you guys hate each other. You guys want to kill each other. You're going to live in the house together? You're crazy. No, look, I got more square feet. No, this is not a good idea. What do you care about when you're trying to get a house? I'm sorry? Comfort. So comfort might be something. I don't care necessarily how big or small it is. I want it to be a comfortable house. What else might you care about in the house? Location. And then the next two after location are location, and the next one is yes. So the joke in real estate, it's location, location, location. What else might you care about? And as a hint, I serve on a regional school committee. Neighbors, schools. And so for people who, in the old days actually physically worked in New York City, a lot of them would live, an hour or so distant to be in a very good situation where you have a large house, you have a good school district, but now you have a long commute. So you have all these different factors that you have to consider. How much are you willing to trade in terms of size of house and school district for smaller commute, and maybe being able to see your kids more? Maybe seeing your kids more is not a positive trade-off. I don't know, but so it's very simple if you only have one thing you care about, profit. If you have lots of different things, you have to find some way to compare. How do I trade off between location and size and school district? And so this is now a multi-objective linear programming problem. We'll talk about how to do something like that. And then we'll talk about the more general case where you may not even know what the quantities are. Does anybody know what the price of gas is today?
$4.
Around $4. I think it's a little under $4. $3.90, something along that. And so, huge problem. One of the early problems that linear programming was used for was to help the oil industry decide where to have refineries, where to have, how to ship the oil from the refineries to the different markets. And the problem is you don't always know how much each market is going to want. And so you have variable demand. And so how do you solve problems where you don't even know, what the problem is that you're going to solve? Airlines have this as well. It would be wonderful for the airlines if everybody could fill out a form of our flight preferences for the next 10 years so that they could plan in advance. What do airlines do because they don't get that information?
Are there cancellation fees if you cancel too close?
There are cancellation fees, but how do airlines try to figure out what flights they should have?
Through estimation model.
Yeah, through estimation with models, past performance. One of the first projects I worked on, so I told you I bought this linear programming book. I was a geek, I read it, I enjoyed it. Fast forward a few years, I'm in grad school, I'm a number theorist at Princeton, and I start dating somebody, eventually we get married, who is a graduate student at Wharton, the business school at UPenn. And when her professors find out, wait, you're dating a mathematician? Can we talk to him? And so they were doing a project on linear programming for the movie industry in terms of trying to figure out if you are going to show a certain set of movies, what time should you show them on which screens? It's always interesting because each year I get older and my students stay roughly the same. How many of you have actually read newspapers? Only online, physical newspapers. So the problem we were working on, this was from the early 2000s, the movie theater had about 2 hours from when they chose the movies to when they had to tell the newspapers what schedule they wanted them to print. And so we had to basically do the best scheduling we could in 2 hours. And so it was a really interesting constraint. Right, so I want you to learn how to do linear programming. There'll be other methods we're going to discuss, but this is the big one from the class. We are not going to prove why it runs so quickly. It's actually extremely efficient. It's extremely fast. We're not going to prove that. Instead, we're going to look at a bunch of similar problems, and I'm going to show you why those similar problems or related problems can be done quickly. and then just ask you to either trust me or to be inspired and take a future course in linear programming where you really go into the nuts and bolts and prove why it works so quickly. But for first course, I don't want to go into all of that. I want to concentrate on applying it. I want to concentrate on just how general it can be. I want to talk a lot about the different types of problems you can look at. So I want to emphasize the techniques and asking the right questions. So let's see. So I want to try to switch at least for a second to the screen for the people at home. Let's see how to do this. Okay, so let's see. Oops. Okay. So hopefully people can see this. Let's see. All right, so okay. So can people see this cube? Yes. This is a little bit different than a normal Rubik's Cube you look at. What's one thing you notice about this immediately? It's asymmetrical.
Only 4 squares per side.
There's 4 squares per side. So this is actually just, it's essentially a 2x2 cube. But instead of using color, it uses size. There is no difference in solving this and solving a normal cube, except you now have to use size as your clue rather than color. For a lot of things, there's muscle memory, especially if you're in sports where you just instinctively know how to do certain things. I've never seen a center fielder stop and do a differential equation to calculate where to run to catch a pop-up. You just eventually start to know where to go. It's amazing how when things are changed a little bit, it can cause trouble. A lot of mathematics is about finding the right perspective to look at things. This is the more standard 3x3 cube. And then, if people are interested, it takes about an hour to learn how to solve a 2x2 cube. It takes maybe another hour at most to learn how to solve a 3x3. If people are interested, will learn later. This next cube over here is one of my favorites. So hopefully you can see this well enough. So you've got the yellow side and the white side. And then if you look, what do you notice about the other sides? They're off the main axis, but what do you notice about them? Yeah, it's 2x3. And so when I first got a cube like this, I was stuck. I did not know how to do it. And then eventually, like a lot of math, if you look at it the right way, it's trivial. It's learning how to look at things the right way. So if you look at this and you try to turn the red side, I always teach people to solve the red side first because most people do the white side. This way, if I ever meet somebody doing the red side, I know they learned either from me or one of my students. If you try to turn the red side, it just doesn't turn. If you hold it, however, at a 30 or 60 degree angle, depending on how you want to view things, this whole thing now turns as a side. It's really just a 3x3 cube. But the side now, there's no red side. It's a combined, like over here, you've got like a red-green side. There's your 3x3, but it's hidden. So much of the world is like that, is you actually know enough to do it, you may not recognize immediately that you know enough. And that's one of the real goals of this course, is to try to show you how do you find the right way to look at things. And we're going to talk a lot about that. Again, I'm not a big fan of having you learn massive amounts of content. You can always pick up content. It's the perspective of how to look at, how to attack a problem. Okay, so again, we're going to talk about modeling problems and analyzing models. We'll talk about elegant solutions versus brute force. These are actually slides from an earlier iteration of the class I taught. It's no longer going to be writing a textbook for the AMS, but I'm involved in a lot of organizations where we do math outreach, and there will be opportunities to actually have publications based on what we're doing on this class. And so writing things up along those lines. So some of this will be presented at the joint math meetings in Boston. So if anybody is interested in going to Boston in early January during the very beginning of winter study, let me know. That's definitely an option. Expenses, fortunately, will not be too bad, coming from here. The real issue will be the weather. A couple of different types of problems. Here are some of the more famous problems where linear programming has been applied. If you are really into theory, sphere packing is an absolutely wonderful one. If you're really into applied, the diet problem was one of the first big successes. And so imagine you are a dictator. What do you think the diet problem might be if you're a dictator?
Choosing what foods to produce.
Okay, choosing what foods to produce, and what do you think you're trying to maximize or minimize?
Maximize support for you.
So it depends how good and how loyal your armed forces are.
Yeah.
So what might you be trying to maximize or minimize if you're an evil dictator? I'll say evil dictator, not benevolent dictator.
Well, minimize opposition.
Minimize opposition, but when you're trying to, for the diet,
Support or power.
no, not quite. For the diet, what do you think you're trying to do?
Minimize the energy that.
So one thing is trying to keep the people lethargic. I hadn't thought about that, but there's something else.
How full they get per.
Not how full. So you've got to decide how many resources you're going to put into food. What might you be? Yeah, you want to minimize cost. I want to keep the people alive just barely. What's the cheapest diet I can do? And so years ago, when I taught this class, I had some students who did some, it's being recorded, so I can't say exactly how they did it, but they got access to all the nutritional information of products at a local supermarket. And they found the cheapest possible diet that you could get in the Williamstown area that would keep you alive. And they actually brought it in for me to eat. Fortunately, I was on some medication at the time and I was afraid that would interact badly, so I was not able to actually take it. I do have a picture of this truly disgusting meal that they had.
What was it?
When we get to that part of the unit, I'll look up what it was, but I mean, oh my God, it was, there are certain items that just have absurdly high values in certain nutritional areas. So when you put some of them in, it just goes through the roof. Now, in the real world, you might want to have a diet that is cheap, but what else might you be concerned with if you are the one who's eating it? Nutrition. So we'll put that in as a minimum, that I want a diet that will keep me alive. Taste, right? This is a great example of a multi-objective linear programming problem. How much am I willing to trade on cost for taste? And you can have this when you're trying to decide what restaurant to go out with. If you're concerned about how healthy you are, am I willing to take a hit on the calories tonight and then do better tomorrow? Huge issue is scheduling. For the airlines, we've talked about for movie theaters, Major League Baseball, so many different things. Can you come up with a good schedule that satisfies a lot of constraints? In many years, the Boston Red Sox are actually a decent team. This is not one of them, sadly. New York Yankees, Boston Red Sox are often very exciting games, often have playoff implications. Those games are more likely to be scheduled on like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and have national TV exposure. So when you're making schedules, you often have lots of different constraints that you want to go into. One of my favorite is elimination numbers. So any sports fan, can you tell me what the elimination number is? So it's the number of.
How many games a team is away from winning the division?
Oh, oops. Could you say that from Zoomland again?
How many games a team is away from winning the division?
Not from winning the division. So elimination number is essentially how many games you're away from being eliminated.
Okay. I got the
And
team
so-
flip, sorry.
Yep, you're off by a minus sign. And so the elimination number is, well, once you're eliminated, then you have no chance. And so once a team is eliminated, they might start giving other people a chance. Let's see how our prospects can do. Back in 2004, the greatest baseball season of all time, the Red Sox won the wild card. And they won it one day earlier than the newspapers reported. Because the newspapers didn't take into account the fact that they were looking at peer-to-peer matchups. Could the Angels catch the Red Sox and get the wild card? Yes. Could the A's catch the Red Sox and get the wild card? Yes. And what they forgot to do is that, well, the Angels and the A's are in the same division. One of them is going to win the American League West. And so the only way that they could catch the Red Sox was to win all their remaining games. And the Angels and the A's had 3 games against each other. And so if you win all your games, you would actually win the American League West and not take over the wildcard spot from the Red Sox. So it's very easy to forget little things when you're doing calculations. It's so easy to miss a case. And you can do a lot of your preliminary checks, and the more checks you do, the better, but you have to be very careful. The Sox had actually clinched 1 day earlier than was printed in the newspapers because they were not taking into account the more complicated problem. There was a website that actually was doing this properly. They were running their analysis at like 2 a.m. Because they figured even by, I think it was 2 a.m. Pacific time, because they figured by 2 a.m. Pacific time, all the games are done and we're not going to have any more data coming in. Okay, so talking a little bit about my experience, I've mentioned some of these. So I've done a lot of work in marketing, especially in applications to the movie industry. I've done a lot in data integrity, detecting fraud with benefits law or detecting when fraud has not happened, giving talks at the Internal Revenue Service, which was a very interesting experience. I've also done a lot of work in sabermetrics, which is the art or the science of applying math and stats to baseball. And of course, this can be generalized to other sports. And I will be teaching a course on this in the spring, the mathematics of sports. And so I'm really interested in, especially if you're on a sports team, please talk out to your teams, your teammates, and see if there's anything they want to be studied. I can't go into too much detail. Years ago, I was teaching number theory, and I had 2 perspectives, and I was chatting with them, and afterwards, I invited them out to lunch. And they said, can our parents come? I go, sure. So I'm chatting, and it turns out the dad went to Princeton like me, but a few years earlier. He has a degree in economics, but fine. We both did the PhD program there. We've got a lot in common. Turns out we both like sports, and we both like math and sports. And we're chatting, and he's just bemoaning the fact that soccer is at least a decade behind baseball in terms of applying. And so I got a couple of questions he asked me, right, in terms of, I think you should be pulling the goalie a little bit more when you're down by a lot late in the game. If you lose, 4-0 or 5-0, you've lost. You have to figure out at some point, do I want to try to save goal differential for tie-breaking statistic later, or if I'm down by 1 goal, by 2 goals, do I risk it? Which hockey is more willing to do. We were talking about various things, and he was bemoaning the fact that people don't do the things that mathematics tell you should. And then he said something casually, which made me reassess the conversation. It turns out he actually owned one of the Major League Soccer franchises. And so you have a situation where the owner is telling the players, telling the coaches, I have your back on this. But there's no buy-in, or at least there wasn't buy-in back then. I've talked to some, general managers in Major League Baseball. How many people are at least somewhat of a baseball fan? And so there's a lot of questions about how relief pitches are used or misused, as a lot of us feel. And what they said is, I agree with you, but players are not robots. And certain roles have certain impressions in people's mind, and you have to take into account the fact that you have players. And so the reason I'm sharing this is when you do the mathematics, that's only part of the job. The next part is you have to sell what you've done. If you are, the coding monkey, your job is to sell it to the person who can say yay or nay. Or if you are the director, you have to sell it to the team that's going to implement it. So a huge part of this class is going to be communications. I really want you to be able to talk to people about math. It's hard. I was an introvert until grad school. When one of my friends told me, you should run for social chair. I said, well, don't you want somebody who likes being with people to be your social chair? No, not you'd be. As it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It really got me out of my shell. You want to be noticed. So I am a little bit different from most professors. And I realize this is being recorded right now. I haven't really looked to see who's in the class, haven't really looked at your face photos, not really trying to get to know any of you. Wasn't really paying that much attention when you said your names. I'll talk a little bit about more of this later. But your job is to make me get to know you. So I'm always available to go for a walk, to grab a coffee, to have lunch, to just chat. But when you get into the real world, it's not like Williams. People are not going to be trying to go out of their way to get to know you and to make life easy. You want to make sure you're noticed. This is why I want you to start getting people skills now. I want you to be able to talk. I want people to eventually at some point talk to people on the board of trustees. Everybody here is going to have to write a letter of recommendation for someone in this class. What does this mean? It means you need to know that person well enough to write a letter, which means if someone is writing a letter about you, you have to act in a good enough way that people notice you. It's a good experience to learn how to write a letter of recommendation. I will actually share a letter of recommendation I wrote for my daughter recently. She was taking the course advancement to place out of Algebra 2, and she was a little bit nervous. And so I wrote her a letter to just, help her, feel better. My brother did this for me years ago when I was applying for various things. It's a good experience to learn how to write a letter for two reasons. One, someday you're going to have to do it, and you may not have somebody who shows you what to do. And two, you're going to have people who are evaluating you. It's nice for you to know, what are they looking for? And what can you do to make sure that they see what they need to see? So it's a really good experience to learn how to write a letter and to always be thinking, what am I doing? Am I going to be noticed or not? There's a lot of very talented people who don't always get the credit they deserve because they're a little shy. I was one of those people for years. I was extremely shy. It can be overcome. It's hard. It can be extremely intimidating. I felt terrified going to my professor's offices when I was a student at Yale, at least my first year or two. Eventually, I got over it and realized that the professors are here because they want to be here, especially at a school like Williams. And so, I strongly urge you to, at least at one point in the semester, hopefully early, set up a time to just meet with me for a walk, coffee, a meal. It doesn't have to be singly, it could be in groups. All right. So this is the generic grading administrative stuff. Homework 15%, midterm 40%, final projects 40%, class participation 5%. These may change a little bit. If you are working on a project that has, say, real world applications, you're working with a business or whatnot, which my students have done in the past, I am happy to adjust the grading. So for instance, one of the iterations I was teaching this class, I had students working with Berkshire Medical Center, and Berkshire Medical was thrilled with the work the students were doing, and they wanted them to, can they do more? And so I told my students, if you want to run with this project, you are excused from all other work from this course for the rest of the semester. I want you to come to lectures, I want you to see what we're discussing, but focus all your efforts on this. They actually entered a competition at Williams and they took second place. The team that took first place had actually competed the year before and had a little bit of an advantage in that it was their second iteration. And they actually had money to continue pursuing this to a product that they could have brought to market, but unfortunately none of them were available over the summer to work on it. So if you find something that you're passionate about, I am quite happy to adjust this so that you can run with that and use this as time to really explore something. So the prereqs, linear algebra, basic linear algebra should be fine. We're not going to be using a tremendous amount of advanced theorems, and I'll try to review what we're doing. If you've seen some analysis, some stats, or some programming, that is a plus. I really don't care what language or environment you program in. Depending on what you choose, I will be more helpful than others in terms of helping you debug it. But whatever you want to program in is absolutely fine. So whenever I'm in my office, it's office hours. I will try to keep my schedule online. In previous years, I've had an anonymous way for people to email me, but unfortunately, I think somebody has actually gone in and destroyed the account. So I don't think it works anymore. Either that or it's now been moved to whenever somebody now tries to log on, Google has now changed things and they send me, someone is trying to log on. So you're welcome to try that. I don't know if it's going to work anymore. I hope I am not so intimidating that you can't just come to me directly, but if you do have any concerns, worst case now, just write a note and put it underneath my door. But okay. So I use state-of-the-art 1990s technology. I use programs that are no longer supported, and they still actually have some issues running on my computer. The advantage is when I get the updates that Williams has just changed what course server we're using, I can just hit delete because I don't use the courseware server. I don't have to worry about compatibility issues. I don't have to worry about, oh, we've just discovered a bug, which has happened to some of my colleagues. The web page does not look beautiful, but it has all the information available, and you can just click on that. So there will be a tremendous amount of resources. I will record all the classes, including the stuff that I'll write on the board. So I'll be writing on an iPad, and so that you will have all the notes available. This way, if you need to, miss a class or something, everything will be there. How many of you are seniors who are going to be applying for jobs? Okay, so that is like a 5th class. And so I will be very flexible with deadlines as long as you give me at least a day's notice. If you give me less than a day's notice, it's got to be really bad. You know, the president just called and needs my advice on, I have to go to Washington by now. You know, something like that, something at that level of unexpectedness, sure. But you should be able to plan accordingly. You know, the reason why you're told when things are due is so that you can adjust your schedule and say, I'm going to make sure that this gets done. So unless you give me at least a day's notice, I'm almost surely going to say no to an extension. If you give me more than a day's notice, that's fine. Now, I've had some students who've told me, you know, if our team does really well, we might be competing in 5 weeks. That's plenty of notice, you know. So anything like that is fine. If you want to do practice interviews, I'm happy to do practice interviews with you or set you up with your Williams students. So I wrote opportunity to help write a book. It's now going to be opportunity to help write some papers on operations research and applications to various things. Prepare for class. So you must do the readings before class. You know, class will be far more effective if we don't have to cover the standard stuff and we can cover the more complicated, more interesting material. I finally knock over the eraser. Yes. All right. So here's some advice from my brother. He has distilled what he has learned in college to 3 items. The first is party less than the person next to you. For those of you on the end, it's pretty clear who you have to party less than. For those of you in the middle, you have at least a little bit of a choice. Take advantage of office hours and mentoring. And this is something I was mentioning earlier today. I am not going to try to get to know you. I want you to force me to get to know you. You should have at least one professor get to know you well every semester. Even if you succeed only half the time, by the time you graduate, you'll have 3 to 4 professors who know you well enough to write letters of recommendation, who will be aware of you and say, hey, this opportunity would be really great for, you know, so-and-so. Years ago, I received a request from a student I taught her first year at Brown in linear algebra, and she needed a lot of recommendations. Like, oh my God, it's been 6 years. I had you only in a freshman class. Is there anybody who knows you better? Not really. And you know, I'm feeling, you know, I don't think I can do, oh, wait, oh, you're applying for an MBA? Oh yeah, I can write a letter for an MBA, yes, because I've seen what the math background is from a lot of those people. I can write that. But if it had been, you know, a serious letter, would not have been able to do it for a person like that. Take good notes, have good filing systems, have good naming systems. My first year at Brown, I was one of five people teaching a Calc 1 course. And there was a grad student who was teaching another class, another section. And then years later, he's doing a postdoc with essentially no teaching. And he's applying for positions and he needs a teaching letter. And he just realizes there's nobody at his school who's seen him teach. And you will, you know, we taught together 7 years ago. Do you remember me? I was like, well, okay, I did come and visit your class once. If you have no one else, I can write a letter. And he goes, that would be great. And so I go to my files, and fortunately, we had both forgotten this. I had visited him the next year when he taught a linear algebra class. And at the end of the class, you know, one of the students had said, could you please tell me what you're teaching next semester so I could take it? And I had written that down and I had notes. So I can actually write, and I have some specific things I can mention. And you know, this goes back to making sure you have the people who are going to support you, make sure that they have the resources they need. You think, who are you going to need? Do they have what they need? Do you have people who can write those letters? Do you have people who can pick up the phone and help you? I'm happy to be one of those people. If it's another professor on campus, that's fine as well. But you should really be trying to get to know at least one professor well each semester who will go to fight for you. The last is learn to manage your time. No one else wants to. So I worked 2 jobs in college. You know, it forced me to be very efficient in my time. I know a lot of athletes find it's actually easier in season than out of season because your day is so structured. One of the best things you can learn in college is how to manage your time, you know, make sure things get done. You know, it shouldn't be a surprise if something's on the syllabus that, you know, this homework is due on this day, then that's when it's going to be due. You know, I'm happy to discuss, you know, if people prefer having homeworks due on Mondays or on Fridays, you know, people like having the weekend, you know, happy to make homework, you know, due on Mondays, stuff like that. And as I said, I'm happy to do practice interviews, adjusting deadlines, a couple of useful links. So how many people have never used LaTeX before? Okay, so if you've never used LaTeX before, it takes about an hour to learn how to do a decent job. And so I have template files there so that you can go, this is how you can write scientific writing very easily. And if you go to my webpage, if you change any extension that's .pdf for a file that I made to .tex, you get the source code. And the goal is, make it easy for people to see what you've done and modify it. So for a lot of things in life, there's a huge difference between creating and modifying. If you have something that works, can you just tweak it a little bit? Awesome. So we have some computer science people. What languages do you know? What's the oldest language you've programmed in? I'm sure I'm going to beat your asses on this one, if I can say that. Oldest language you know. Okay, C. Anything earlier than C? Basic. Ruby. How old is Ruby?
I'm not sure. I might be there on the same time. But no one uses that.
Right. I've programmed in Fortran. And so the reason I programmed in Fortran is because I was working with a nuclear physicist, and the code was written in Fortran because this code was decades old back when I was a student in the 90s. I only had to modify existing Fortran code. I'm old enough that one of my books is from basic to C. So the old basic with the line numbers and whatnot. If you have basic coding skills, it's frequently not that bad to go to another environment. The hardest thing is the syntax. Oh, great, it's a parenthesis here, it's a colon here. This starts with the first entry as a 0, this starts with the first entry as a 1. What you normally do is you have two windows open, and you have one window where you just do some testing. Let me make sure I know how to write a for loop. Let me make sure I know how to write a while loop. If you've never programmed before, let me know. We'll have some programming classes. You really need to learn how to program. This is a very useful skill. I frequently do a lot of things in Mathematica. It's like the singing horse. What's amazing is not that the horse sings well, but that the horse sings at all. It's very friendly, has great graphical interfaces, easy to work with, and a lot of really nice predefined functions. It's not the fastest. My brother works at MathWorks that does MATLAB, much, much faster for linear programming. But for a lot of the stuff I'm doing, almost anything is fine, and Mathematica is very friendly. All right, so there's a bunch of different examples. Yeah, we have time for this. I know who's in the class. I'll play this one. I'm going to get the. I had actually loaded this up before class so that there wouldn't be an ad. Unfortunately, also it says the.
2022
Does anybody remember the Alabama
awarded Best
game?
Driver Appeal by J.D. Power.
Okay, so the situation is it's a tie game, and the clock actually expired. There was no time left. Alabama then protested and said that they looked at the clock incorrectly, and they added back 1 second. And so Alabama is going to go for a 61-yard field goal to win the game. And hopefully you can hear the announcers.
Now they've officially made it 57 yards. Remember, a block kick can go the other way.
It's not letting me do. All right, so the announcer is saying, the big thing you have to worry about is having the field goal blocked. And so the field goal was a little bit short. And notice what Auburn did. They kept one person back in front of the field goal. On the off chance that the field goal went short, they had a person there to get the ball and maybe run it back. And successfully ran it back for 61 yards. And so this is a great example of trying to decide, how do you want to allocate finite resources? Do you want to put another person on the line of scrimmage to block the kick? Or do you want to put someone back by the field goal for a short kick and try to do something from that? It's a 61-yard kick. That is far beyond the range of most mortals. And so Auburn correctly decided, rather than trying to block the kick, we're more concerned with the opportunity of a short kick. And so again, it's trying to figure out how to allocate resources. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip these ones. So one of the things I love to do is when I see inefficiencies, I deal with them. This is how a buffet should be done. Why is this a good way to do a buffet?
Both sides.
Both sides. And so the table was initially against the wall. I've spent 6 years working in restaurants. I'm actually going back this weekend to the restaurant where I worked as a busboy and as a cook, and just checking to see how they've redone things. And I will report back to the class on how things are done. I went ballistic when I saw a buffet against the wall. It's just like, you're making us go so slow. Pull it out. Who can recognize this place? If you're not a first year, you need to know where this place is. All right, we're gonna have to do a class field trip. No one knows this place? It's in Williamstown. It's on Spring Street.
What?
Yeah, it's Lickety. This is Lickety Split. They've moved it around a little bit, but this is an older version of Lickety Split. About the same. I don't care about ambiance. This infuriated me. This is their place where they were keeping cold drinks back when they had cold drinks outside, right in the sun, when you have all this shaded area. Right? So you're spending a lot more electricity, you're having drinks warmer unnecessarily. This is a sad story. I doubt anyone will notice this one. This is from the Pittsfield Suns. So they're a baseball team down in Pittsfield, not too far from here. And a couple of years ago, I took my son to a baseball game. He was very young, and we sat right behind home plate. And sometimes in life, timing, someone upstairs has a sense of humor about timing. And so I remarked to my son, we have the best seats possible. Right behind home plate, have a perfect view, no chance a foul ball can hurt us. The very next play, a foul ball goes through because they don't have the netting going all the way to the top. Goes through the netting and hits someone 10 rows behind us in the eye. He has to go to the hospital. He's surrounded by his kids who are crying. My son starts to cry. I'm trying to tell him, I never said no one else would get hit. I just said we wouldn't get hit. The angle is just, we're so close, it's not going to get us. This was a terrible inefficiency. There was no need to have a gap like that. I've actually done work on multiple Major League Baseball lawsuits with students, and I am happy to talk about them when the camera is not rolling. And I can talk about some lawsuits I've been involved in terms of foul balls and safety issues. This is one that bothered me from years ago. How many people still get the Williams calendar? Okay, so this is the old calendar, and this is the month of October, and they give you September and November. So you can quickly look down and see where were things the previous month, where will things be the next month. And in the new version, we just get the previous month. And I'd like to see the next month. If I'm in October, I'd like to see where things are going to be in November, because towards the end, just when you're trying to display information, just really think about what you want to do. And so the last thing for today is displaying information. So I'll do two pictures. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. This is a distribution of sunrise and sunset times in North Adams, Massachusetts from 2019. I don't think it's too different now. I'm not going to bother updating it. That's work. Anybody notice anything strange about these plots? Good. So there are 2 points where things seem to happen. Right, we have this incredible movement, and that's because of daylight savings. It should be pretty much continuous. Not entirely, because it's a discrete, but we have so many observations, it should essentially be continuous. So when you see something like this, you should immediately focus on, hey, something interesting must be going on at those 2 points. So whenever you see a plot, try to think of what's interesting. All right, so this is from a few years ago. Who in America is rooting for the Rams or the Patriots in the Super Bowl? And you can see almost all of the country is rooting against the Patriots. There are 3 places that are rooting for the Patriots. Can anybody tell me what the places are and why? You need to know some football history for this. One of them should be obvious as to who's rooting for the New England Patriots.
Massachusetts.
Yeah, New England. New England is rooting for the New England Patriots. Who else is rooting for the New England Patriots? Yeah, do you know why? So that's actually the other one. So St. Louis is rooting for the Patriots because it used to be the St. Louis Rams and they moved to LA. And so St. Louis was pissed that they moved, and that's why you get that little. But there's one other place that's rooting for the Patriots.
I honestly don't remember what.
So what place is it?
Louisiana.
Louisiana. Do you know why
And
it's Louisiana?
It's because the Rams beat the Saints the game to get to the Super Bowl.
Yes.
So Saints fans were probably upset.
Well,
that they were rooting for the Patriots.
it's not just that the Rams beat the Saints. It was that bad pass interference call that was missed.
Yes.
Where it was so bad the NFL had to apologize afterwards. Says, yeah, boy, we missed that one. And that would have given a first down to the Saints. They would have been able to run out the clock and kick the field goal to win the game. So again, whenever you see a plot, you always want to be asking what information is there. And it's the places that are a little bit different that's often indicating something interesting is happening. All right, so this is a good place to stop. If I can figure out how to stop the recording.